Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. I'm Vivian Moore.
Mrs. Moore, if you're here to ask for a job for your son in the logistics department, go down to the basement and speak with human resources. And as for that suit of yours, it really doesn't belong beside this quartz table. It lowers the value of the room.
Richard! Have you lost your mind? Shut your mouth right now!
Nathan, cancel the Line B cash flow lock for Whitmore and Hale. The plan has completely changed. Pull all capital.
Douglas, what's going on?
Richard.
Look at the ultimate ownership structure that the person who owns 100% of Moore Capital, the initials are VM. Vivian Moore. She is the woman you just threw out of this room.
The metal wheels of the LYNX Blue Line train scraped against the tracks with a sharp, screeching sound as it slowed into 3rd Street Station in downtown Charlotte. The morning rush hour had turned the underground station into a fast-moving river of freshly pressed dress shirts, polished leather shoes, and high heels striking the concrete floor in quick, urgent rhythms. Vivian Moore stepped out of the train calmly, moving at a pace that seemed completely separate from the hurry around her. She wore a classic cut suit. The fabric was rough, slightly stiff, and clearly bought from a mid-range retail store in the suburbs. The white shirt underneath had been ironed neatly, though the stitching near the collar had begun to show a little wear. On her shoulder was a plain black leather handbag, with no metal logo and no embossed pattern from any luxury brand. The leather strap had softened after many years of use. The natural curls of the 50-year-old black woman were tied neatly at the back of her neck, revealing a face with deep lines at the corners of her eyes, proof of long years of struggle, work, and endurance. Vivian adjusted the thick black leather folder, tucked firmly against her side, and stepped onto the escalator that carried her up towards street level, where the bright North Carolina morning sun spilled across glass skyscrapers. After walking past 2 blocks filled with coffee shops crowded by office workers waiting in line, she stopped in front of Whitmore Tower. The 42-story building rose above her in dark blue tempered glass, reflecting the clear sky like a monument to wealth. It was a symbol of the old financial power of the Whitmore and Hale family business. Vivian pushed one hand against the heavy glass revolving door and entered the grand lobby. The floor was made of polished white Carrara marble, so glossy it could reflect a person's face, and it mirrored the huge crystal chandeliers suspended from the high ceiling. Her steps sounded small and steady as she walked toward the semicircular reception desk made from solid walnut wood in the center of the lobby. 2 young white receptionists in fitted black uniforms, their hair pulled into glossy high buns, were busy typing and answering phones. When Vivian stopped in front of the desk, the woman wearing a name tag that read Jessica paused and looked up. Her eyes moved quickly from Vivian's natural curls to the unbranded suit, then down to the worn corner of her leather bag. The professional smile on Jessica's lips faded at once, replaced by a tight judging line. "I have an appointment on the 42nd floor at 10 o'clock, Vivian said. Her voice was low, warm, and very slow, just loud enough not to disappear inside the vast lobby. Jessica did not check the computer system right away. She lowered her eyes to the black leather folder in Vivian's hand, then folded her arms and leaned back in her chair. "The 42nd floor is the senior executive office area for the board. There's a very important board meeting there today, and security is at its highest level. You say you have an appointment? With whom?" "With the finance department and the executive board," Vivian replied. Her face did not show even the faintest irritation at the condescending attitude in front of her. She reached into the pocket of her blazer, pulled out an ID card, and placed it on the stone counter. Jessica picked up the card with 2 fingers, looked at the name Vivian Moore, then looked up at the woman standing across from her. At that exact moment, a middle-aged white man in a Brooks Brothers suit stepped through the security entrance. The other receptionist immediately stood and greeted him in a sweet voice. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. Have a productive day." Turning back to Vivian, Jessica pushed the ID card across the counter. Beside it, she placed a dark blue leather-bound logbook and a cheap ballpoint pen. "Our VIP guest system does not show your personal name on this morning's list. Perhaps you're with one of the support service contractors or here to deliver confidential documents. All non-management personnel and non-VIP guests are to sign the contractor service log. Then use Yale service elevator number 4 in the back hallway near the loading area." Vivian looked at the contractor logbook, where the names of air conditioning repair workers, flower delivery people, and water tank cleaning staff had been written down. She did not argue. She did not explain who she was or what she had come to do. Vivian simply picked up the cheap pen, turned to the nearest blank page, and wrote her full name in fine, decisive handwriting. Then she gave the receptionist a small, gentle smile. "Thank you." Instead of following the service elevator route in the dark corner as instructed, Vivian walked straight through the automatic glass security barrier. The temporary yellow contractor visitor badge, activated with a short beep, she entered the high-speed elevator, heading directly to the 42nd floor. As the digital numbers on the panel jumped quickly from 1 to 42, the changing air pressure made her ears feel slightly blocked, but Vivian remained motionless in the center of the elevator. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her stomach, and her eyes looked straight at the polished metal doors. She knew exactly what was waiting behind those doors. She also knew the company's financial condition better than anyone sitting above her. The elevator doors opened into a completely different world. The hallway on the 42nd floor was covered in thick ash-gray wool carpet that swallowed every footstep. The walls were decorated with expensive abstract oil paintings and black and white archival photographs of the first-generation founder of Whitmore and Hale. Vivian walked along the hall to the main conference room, a pair of double mahogany doors carved with fine detail. She pushed the door open gently and stepped inside. The large room was flooded with natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the Catawba River and the entire Charlotte financial district. In the middle stood an 8-meter-long white quartz conference table, surrounded by 12 white executive board members. Every one of them wore the finest tailored suits from Wall Street, their hair carefully styled and held in place. When Vivian entered, the low discussion about stock indicators stopped immediately. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward the black woman who had just appeared. Some brows tightened in surprise. Some eyes passed over her with thinly hidden contempt. Others stayed silent with cold curiosity. Near the window end of the table, CFO Douglas Crane stood with both hands pressed against the quartz surface. The 45-year-old man's face was pale, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead, even though the building's central air conditioning was set to 18 degrees Celsius. Vivian did not sit in one of the expensive leather chairs around the table. She walked to the corner of the conference room, where a short row of sofas had been placed for assistants or meeting note-takers. She set the black leather folder on her lap and sat down calmly. She looked at Douglas Crane and gave him a small nod, a quiet professional greeting. At exactly 5 minutes past 10, the double doors of the conference room opened again. Richard Whitmore walked in. The 55-year-old CEO of Whitmore and Hale carried an overpowering energy the moment he appeared. He was tall with carefully trimmed platinum hair, wearing a black tailcoat-style suit custom-made by a famous London tailor. A rose-gold Audemars Piguet watch flashed on his left wrist. The air around Richard was filled with the smell of expensive cologne, mixed with premium cigar smoke. "Good morning, gentlemen." Richard's voice rang out strong and confident, the voice of a man born at the finish line who had never known the taste of failure. He walked around the conference table and shook hands warmly with each executive board member. Everyone in the room stood to return the CEO's handshake with maximum respect. Richard continued forward, his smile bright as he approached the back row, where several male partners from major law firms were seated. He shook their hands and patted their shoulders with the easy closeness of men who belonged to the same elite golf club. Then his steps suddenly stopped when he saw Vivian Moore sitting quietly in the corner. Vivian looked straight at Richard. Her eyes did not move away. The calm in her posture made her look more like a judge than someone seated in a support row. Vivian slowly stood, adjusted the hem of her blazer, took one small step forward, and politely held out her right hand. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. I'm Vivian Moore," she said. Her voice stayed low, steady, and completely calm, without even the slightest ripple. Richard Whitmore stood still. The smile on his face vanished in an instant, replaced by a coldness that was hard to describe. He did not offer his hand. The CEO's eyes began to move slowly, deliberately. He stared at Vivian's outstretched hand, a hand with dark skin, a hand with no diamond ring or pearl bracelet. Then his gaze moved up to her plain, rough-looking suit, paused on the simple worn leather handbag resting on the chair, and finally returned to her natural curls and the color of her skin. The entire conference room fell into a deadly silence. Even the low hum of the air conditioning seemed to disappear, leaving only the thick, visible tension in the air. The 12 board members held their breath. No one dared cough or shift a chair. They looked at Richard, then at Vivian, waiting for the response of the emperor of this tower. Richard slowly pulled his right hand from his pocket, but not to shake Vivian's hand. He lifted it to adjust his wine-red silk tie. Then very slowly and very deliberately, he placed both hands into the pockets of his suit pants, tilted his head slightly back, and looked down at the woman before him. The corner of his mouth lifted into a half-smile full of contempt, a smirk that carried generations of class arrogance, racial prejudice, and male power. "I believe you have walked into the wrong room, Mrs. Moore," Richard said. His voice was not loud or angry. It carried an even, mocking tone hidden beneath a false layer of professional polish. Cleaning staff, meeting refreshment staff, and those responsible for tea or light food service used the rear hallway near the service elevators. Reception downstairs should have told you that before allowing you up here. Vivian kept her hand in the air for exactly 3 more seconds. She looked into Richard's eyes. There was no trembling in her face, no burst of anger, and absolutely no tear in her eyes. Her calm was so deep that Richard's smirk faltered for the briefest moment. Then Vivian slowly withdrew her hand and folded both hands in front of her stomach. Her face remained as still as a windless lake. Richard turned away from her and took 2 more steps toward his high-end leather chair at the head of the table. His voice rang out again, this time aimed at the entire room. "This is Whitmore and Hale's internal strategic meeting worth hundreds of millions of dollars. We are preparing to welcome some of the most influential figures in New York finance to decide the future of this company. I will not allow the professional image and seriousness of this room to be diluted by people who have no business being here. Richard, stop, please." A trembling, broken voice came from the head of the table. Douglas Crane stepped forward once, his whole body shaking beneath his Brooks Brothers suit. The CFO's face was now gray like ash. His eyes looked at Richard with desperate pleading mixed with pure panic. This is not what you think. She is not service staff. Richard, you need to let me explain first." Richard Whitmore immediately lifted his left hand, fingers spread, cutting Douglas off with brutal rudeness. His eyes sharpened and snapped toward his CFO with a cold look. "Douglas, you are being too sensitive and losing your composure because of cash flow pressure over the last few weeks. I am the CEO of this company, and I know exactly what I am doing to protect the standards of the Whitmore family. I do not need a Laplandic woman in a cheap suit sitting here to take notes or serve tea while we prepare to sign a deal that will decide whether this company lives or dies." Richard turned sharply back toward Vivian Moore. He pointed at the closed mahogany double doors. "Leave this room immediately before I press the button and have building security escort you down to the contractor lobby. Remember your place, Mrs. Moore. The 42nd floor is not for people like you." Richard Whitmore's arms pointed straight at the mahogany double doors, his finger motionless like an unchangeable verdict. The order he had just spoken carried an absolute threat, enough to make most people panic or collapse under humiliation. But Vivian Moore did not move. She stood exactly where she was, looked at the finger accusing her, then slowly lifted her gaze to Richard's red face full of pride. The silence covering the conference room was no longer the silence of an ordinary scandal. It was thick, suffocating, like the air just before lightning strikes the ground. The 12 executive board members around the quartz table began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Thomas, the man Richard had just praised for a financial analysis quoted in the Wall Street Journal, gave a small cough and lowered his head, pretending to adjust the silver cufflink on his sleeve. Not one of these powerful men stood up to say a fair word. In the world of Whitmore and Hale, absolute obedience to the person sitting in the highest chair was an unwritten law, even when that person had just publicly insulted an innocent woman. Vivian gently reached into the pocket of her blazer. The sudden movement made Richard narrow his eyes slightly. The muscles in his shoulders tightened beneath the expensive suit fabric, as if he expected this woman to pull out something disruptive. But the only thing Vivian took out was a small, white packet of tissues bought from a convenience store near the subway station. She pulled one tissue free and opened it slowly with bodohi. Her face stayed perfectly calm, not a single muscle twitched. She showed no sign of a person crushed by humiliation. In front of the 12 executive board members and the arrogant CEO, Vivian lifted the tissue and gently wiped the palm of her right hand, the hand she had politely offered to Richard only minutes earlier. She wiped each finger with careful, unhurried precision. Her composure was so calm, so elegant, that the action did not look like she was wiping away sweat. It looked like a cleansing ritual after nearly touching something unclean. When she finished, Vivian did not turn and leave. She stepped closer to the conference table and lightly pulled out the expensive leather chair beside CFO Douglas Crane. The chair legs made a low, muted sound against the thick wool carpet. She sat down with complete dignity and placed her plain, unbranded leather handbag on the white quartz table beside Douglas's expensive tablet. Then she opened the thick black leather folder, revealing pages packed with financial charts, cash flow numbers, and deep strategic analysis stamped in red with the word confidential. "Richard, you really have to stop." Douglas Crane could not hold back any longer. A voice cracked, rising higher than normal and breaking through the control Richard was trying to maintain over the room. Douglas jumped to his feet. The leather chair behind him rolled back and struck the tempered glass wall. His hands shook so badly, he nearly knocked over the mineral water beside his computer. "You don't understand what's happening. She is not serving staff. And that suit, God, Richard, sit down and look at this document." Richard turned his head sharply. His gaze cut straight toward his CFO like a blade. Douglas had never openly resisted him in front of the executive board in the past 10 years, and the act wounded the CEO's authoritarian ego. Richard took one step forward, placed both hands on the quartz table, and leaned toward Douglas with crushing psychological pressure. "Douglas, I already warned you about losing your composure this morning," Richard said through his teeth. His voice dropped, but it carried a clear threat. "The losses from 3 pre-C real estate projects are making you see saviors everywhere. Whitmore and Hale is a 70-year-old corporation. We have strict standards for partners, for culture, and for the kind of people worthy of entering this 40-cent floor. We are sitting here waiting for the executive chairwoman of Moore Capital Group, an investment fund that manages tens of billions of dollars in assets for some of the oldest financial families in America. The person we are waiting for moves markets. We are not waiting for a woman who rides the subway and wears an outdated supermarket suit." Richard looked back at Vivian. Eyes were full of systemic contempt, the kind of prejudice belonging to someone who believes a person's ability and value are only valid if they appear in lurid form of luxury goods and privileged skin color. He straightened his posture, adjusted the collar of his suit, and released another string of cruel, structural insults. "Mrs. Moore, I do not know how you managed to get a temporary visitor badge to come up here, or whether you are trying to find some kind of funding opportunity for a charity from your neighborhood slum. But let me tell you how the real world works. On Wall Street and in this room, numbers have no room for pity. If you are looking for a wage job for your son or one of your relatives in logistics or driving, take that thick folder down to the basement and speak with a junior HR employee. But here, that suit of yours, it truly does not belong on the 42nd floor. It lowers the value of the quartz table we are sitting at." Vivian Moore remained seated in the leather chair. She listened to every insult from Richard without interrupting him. Her face was still like a statue carved from granite. Her deep black eyes looked straight at the CEO, seeing through the expensive tailcoat suit, through the smell of high-end cologne, and into the rot and hidden panic inside an empire about to collapse. For someone who had grown up in the Brownsville public housing projects, none of these words were new to Vivian. She had heard versions of them for 30 years while climbing to the top of finance by herself. The only difference was that now, she was the person holding the key to the survival of the man insulting her. She did not choose to scream. She did not use crude words to defend herself. She did not throw the file in Richard's face to prove who she was. Vivian understood that in the highest world of finance, the most brutal punishment never came from fists or arguments. It came from numbers and from the cold removal of power. Vivian slowly closed the black leather folder. The sound of leather meeting leather was clean and final. She rose calmly and picked up her plain handbag. From inside it, she took out an old BlackBerry phone with a physical QWERTY keyboard, some of the letters already faded. To modern tech billionaires, it looked like an antique. But among the highest-level financiers, it was still valued for the absolute security of its independent server system. The entire conference room turned its attention to the old phone in her hand. Vivian pressed a short, highly encrypted number sequence and lifted the phone to her ear. Her face remained calm, but the voice that came out carried supreme authority, cold, steady, and low enough to send a chill through anyone listening. "Nathan, cancel the Line B cash flow lock for Whitmore and Hale." Vivian said into the phone, her eyes staying fixed on Richard Whitmore without moving for even 1 second. "The plan has completely changed. Pull all capital." After speaking that one short sentence, Vivian ended the call without waiting for a reply. She returned the phone to her handbag, tucked the black leather folder against her side, and began walking toward the conference room doors. Each step of the 50-year-old black woman landed evenly on the carpet, neither hurried nor slow, completely confident and completely free. Richard Whitmore stood at the head of the conference table, watching Vivian's back before he burst into loud laughter. His laugh echoed through the room, deliberately mocking her to cover the strange tension that had just appeared inside him. "A very impressive little performance, Mrs. Moore," Richard called after her, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Pull all capital? The plan has changed? Are you putting on a show to save the last bit of face before security throws you out? Let me tell you something. Moore Capital Group is the one holding the $360 million funding line we are working with, not someone using a phone from the last century like you. Good luck taking the subway back to your slum." The 12 board members gave small laughs along with their CEO, all except Douglas Crane. The CFO staggered and collapsed into his chair, both hands clutching his head. His eyes stared at the tablet screen as it began flashing nonstop with their urgent alerts from the central banking system. Sweat ran down Douglas's face in streams, soaking the collar of his white shirt. He knew the worst nightmare of Whitmore and Hale had officially begun, and the hole that would bury the entire empire had been dug by their own arrogant CEO, all because of a handshake he refused to give. The sound of the double mahogany doors closing behind Vivian Moore landed with a deep thud, cutting off the mocking laughter, still circling through the 42nd floor conference room. She walked along the thick carpet of the long glass hallway. Her heels made almost no sound on the soft surface. Through the enormous tempered glass panels, stretching from ceiling to floor, the morning sunlight of Charlotte shone down, reflecting the image of a middle-aged black woman walking alone, with her back straight and a strangely calm dignity. The yellow contractor visitor badge still hung from the pocket of her navy blazer, swinging lightly with each movement. Vivian passed an open office where dozens of young employees were bent over their keyboards under cold, white fluorescent lights. A few lifted their eyes and glanced at her simple suit and worn plain handbag with mild indifference before quickly returning to work. That scene, that indifference, pulled Vivian's mind backward 25 years to the financial district of Wall Street in New York. Back then, she was a 22-year-old woman who had graduated with honors in finance from Columbia University, carrying a folder full of certificates and outstanding market analysis papers. But on the first day she stepped into a famous investment fund, the middle-aged white managing director looked at her with the same eyes Richard Whitmore had used that morning. Instead of giving her risk analysis portfolios or complicated investment projects, they handed her a metal tray and forced her to walk 3 blocks in the snow to buy the exact kind of Starbucks coffee the senior associates preferred. For 3 long years, her ability and her groundbreaking ideas were thrown into a drawer and ignored, simply because her and color background from the poor Brownsville public housing projects did not match their definition of elite professionalism. That memory passed through her like an old documentary film. It did not light any fresh anger inside Vivian. It only made her eyes colder and more determined. The woman walking down the hallway of Whitmore Tower now was no longer the frightened young intern afraid of pressure from powerful men. She had built Moore Capital Group from nothing with her own hands and turned it into a financial giant managing tens of dollars, a force capable of breaking or reviving any business with a single signed order. Vivian turned into the corridor leading toward the guest elevators and calmly pressed the down button. She decided she would take a short walk through the lower working floors of Whitmore and Hale to observe more closely the rotten structure Richard Whitmore was so proud to manage. Meanwhile, behind the double mahogany doors of the main conference room, Richard Whitmore's mocking laughter began to fade. CEO walked back toward his high-end leather chair, removed the silver cufflink from his wrist, then fastened it again, an unconscious action that revealed the impatience beginning to grow inside him. He glanced at the Audemars Piguet on his left wrist. It was 10:15 in the morning. "Douglas, why haven't the people from Moore Capital Group arrived downstairs yet?" Richard asked. His voice had lost a little of its earlier ease and now carried a clear pressure. According to the confidential schedule, their ultimate fund owner and chief legal counsel should have walked through this door 10 minutes ago. "Have you checked with their assistant team again?" The 12 board members around the quartz table began whispering to one another. Anxiety spread through the closed room like a virus. Whitmore and Hale's stock price on the New York Stock Exchange had only been open for 1 hour, but it was already showing jagged red lines, falling 4% after rumors leaked that the corporation was facing a serious liquidity shortage. The phone on Richard's desk began vibrating non-stop. The calls were from the 3 largest founding shareholders, people who were now panicking as they watched tens of millions of dollars in assets evaporate from the stock market in just a few short minutes. Richard did not answer. He tapped one finger hard against the white quartz table, creating steady, heavy knocks to force down the panic around him. Stay calm, gentlemen. Moore Capital Group is a professional investment fund. They do not cancel a deal that has passed 3 rounds of legal review just because of a few false market rumors. They know we have collateral in the East Coast commercial real estate chain. That $360 million funding line will absolutely be released before 11 o'clock today. At the corner of the table, CFO Douglas Crane remained slumped in his chair. His hands were locked so tightly together that his knuckles had turned white. The finance director's face had lost all color, and his wide eyes stared at the tablet screen in front of him. On the screen, an urgent email had just arrived from Bank of America's central monitoring system, carrying a top priority command code. Douglas lifted one hand and wiped away cold sweat running from his forehead down his temple. His breathing grew shallow and fast. He did not hear Richard's reassurance, because his mind was being crushed by the digital words on the screen. When he reached the line that read, "Request to withdraw line B disbursement order from escrow account," his whole body shook once. Slowly he looked up at Richard with an expression of absolute horror. The look of a sailor who has just realized that the largest ocean liner in the world has struck a giant iceberg in the dark, and that there are no lifeboats left. "Richard," Douglas said. His voice was small and hoarse, almost swallowed by the ringing phone of another board member. "What is it, Douglas?" Douglas Crane staggered to his feet. His knees seemed ready to give out, forcing him to grip the edge of the quartz table to keep his balance. 3 floors below, in the employee coffee lounge, Vivian Moore stood in front of a vending machine. She calmly inserted a $1 bill into the slot and pressed the button for a glass bottle of spring water. Vivian bent down, took the bottle, twisted off the cap, and sipped lightly while looking through the window toward the opposite tower belonging to Whitmore and Hale's biggest competitor, Apex Holdings. The phone in her handbag vibrated again. A short message from her assistant, Nathan Graves, appeared on the screen. "All procedures to redirect the capital line to Apex Holdings are complete. Legal file is ready for delivery to Richard Whitmore." Vivian smiled, turned off the phone screen, and slowly walked toward the waiting chairs. Inside the 42nd floor conference room, the tension had reached its breaking point as Douglas Crane stood frozen, his face drained of blood. "Douglas, what is wrong with you? Speak!" Richard Whitmore slammed his palm down on the table. The sharp sound made several people flinch. "Is there movement from Moore Capital?" Douglas did not answer with words. With trembling fingers, he turned the tablet around and pushed it along the white quartz table toward Richard. The device stopped in front of the CEO, its screen showing the newly updated corporate profile and ultimate ownership structure of Moore Capital Group on Bloomberg. The update had been posted online exactly 5 minutes earlier, a required procedure before the fund executed a large withdrawal from a strategic investment portfolio. Richard Whitmore raised one eyebrow and looked down at the screen. Eyes skimmed the legal terms, the line showing assets under management, then stopped at the section listing the top executive leadership. In the position of founder, chairwoman of the board, and 100% owner of the investment fund managing tens of billions of dollars, there was no name of some powerful white man from Wall Street, as Richard had always imagined. On the Bloomberg screen, right beside a professionally taken but very simple portrait photo, stood the middle initials and full name printed in the system's bright neon blue financial font, VM Vivan Moore. Every muscle in Richard Whitmore's face froze. His arrogant smile, his supreme confidence, and the constant contempt in the CEO's eyes disappeared completely, replaced by a stunned emptiness that was almost frightening. His gaze stayed locked on the photograph of the black woman with natural curls, wearing the same simple suit and holding the same plain unbranded leather bag, the woman he had personally refused to shake hands with, insulted in front of 12 executive board members, and ordered security to remove from the building less than 20 minutes earlier. The 55-year-old CEO remained motionless at the head of the table. Both hands were pressed against the quartz surface, but his fingers had begun to tremble lightly. His eyes stayed fixed on the tablet screen. His pupils tightened as his authoritarian ego struggled to absorb a truth too large for it to hold. The smell of expensive cologne and premium cigar smoke around him seemed to freeze under the coldness coming from the financial numbers. Around the table, none of the 12 board members dared speak. Their breathing became cautious, short, and broken. They looked at the screen, then at Richard's face as it slowly changed from red with arrogance to pale with fear. The collapse of a family empire does not always begin with a loud explosion. Sometimes it begins with a deadly silence in a senior executive office. At that moment, the only sound that broke the thick air came from the conference room door. The finely carved double mahogany doors opened again. The room seemed to tilt. Several board members turned their heads at once, a cowardly flicker of hope passing through them that the black woman in the navy suit might have returned to negotiate to beg, or at least to offer an honorable exit for both sides. But the person walking through the door was not Vivian Moore. It was Nathan Graves. The chief legal counsel and senior managing representative of Moore Capital Group entered the room with the polished presence of Wall Street's highest elite. Nathan stood nearly 6'3", his hair neatly styled, wearing a charcoal gray three-piece suit handmade by top Savile Row tailors and worth $10,000. Behind him came two white legal assistants in elegant black uniforms, each carrying an expensive crocodile leather briefcase filled with confidential legal documents. Nathan Graves and his delegation represented the exact image of power and wealth that Richard Whitmore had always worshipped. When Richard saw Nathan, the frozen stiffness in his body disappeared at once. The CEO jumped to his feet in a rush. He quickly put on his brightest professional smile, raised one hand to fix the collar of his tailcoat-style suit, and adjusted the position of his wine-red silk tie. Richard moved quickly away from the head chair and walked around the quartz table toward the Moore Capital delegation, both hands opening with eager warmth. "Ah, Mr. Graves, you and your delegation have finally arrived." Richard's voice rang out loudly as he tried to recover the confident tone of a man who owned the tower, even though veins of stress had already appeared in his eyes. "We have been waiting for Moore Capital's people since early this morning. Let us ignore a few minor issues, a few unnecessary misunderstandings that happened with lower-level personnel in the hallway. Time is money, gentlemen. I think we should sit down immediately and proceed with the signing ceremony for this $360 million strategic investment agreement. Everything on the Whitmore and Hale side has been completed to the highest standard." Richard held out his right hand, palm open, aimed directly at Nathan Graves, with a desperate need to be recognized. The CEO believed that in the world of men wearing expensive suits, every conflict could be erased with a strategic handshake and massive benefits on the negotiation table. But Nathan Graves did not stop to return that handshake. The chief legal counsel of Moore Capital walked straight past Richard's hand hanging in the air, completely ignoring the CEO's physical existence as if he were empty space. Nathan moved to the center of the white quartz table and stopped beside CFO Douglas Crane, who was sitting with his head lowered and his face gray. Nathan gestured once. An assistant stepped forward immediately, opened a crocodile leather briefcase, and took out a legal document about 10 pages thick, stamped with a red state court seal and the seal of Moore Capital Group. "Mr. Whitmore, I did not come here this morning to sign any investment agreement," Nathan Graves said. A voice was cold, decisive, and sharp enough to feel like a surgical blade. He stood straight, arms crossed in front of his chest, looking directly at Richard's stunned face. "I am here as the fully authorized legal representative of Moore Capital Group to hand this official written notice directly to your executive board." The smile on Richard Whitmore's face died completely. His right hand stayed in the air for a moment, shaking once before it slowly and humiliatingly lowered into his pocket to hide the embarrassment. "Official notice? Mr. Graves, I do not understand what you are talking about. This $360 million deal has already passed 3 board review rounds on both sides. The funds were supposed to enter our escrow account 10 minutes ago." Nathan Graves's lips lifted into a smile with no warmth at all, the smile of a lawyer whose hourly fee could break smaller companies. He tapped one finger lightly on the legal document lying on the table. "Under the direct order of our chairwoman and sole owner, Mrs. Vivian Moore," Nathan said, emphasizing every word, as if each one were a hammer striking metal. "The woman whose hand you just refused to shake. The woman whose skin color and clothing you just insulted. The woman you ordered security to remove from this conference room exactly 15 minutes ago, Moore Capital Group officially cancels and withdraws the entire $360 million strategic investment proposal for Whitmore and Hale. The capital withdrawal order has been activated through the central banking system and is effective immediately from the moment this document touches the table. The entire conference room felt as if it had been drenched from head to toe in ice water. The 12 executive board members leaned back at the same time, pressing themselves into their leather chairs as if they had just seen a monster preparing to swallow the whole building. A few raised their hands hot to their mouths, their eyes wide as they stared at the document with the raised red seal. There was no funding line anymore. There was no life-saving disbursement for the next 3 weeks of operations. That meant the entire leveraged financial structure of Whitmore and Hale would collapse in a chain reaction. Creditors would rush in, and their stock would be kicked into free fall on Wall Street screens. Richard Whitmore staggered backward 2 steps. The heel of his shoe struck the leg of the head chair, and his whole body almost lost balance. He had to grip the edge of the quartz table to keep himself from collapsing onto the shining marble floor. The CEO's face had lost all color. His lips trembled, gray and dry. Beads of sweat poured out as if he had been soaked, spreading through the tailored shirt beneath his expensive suit. What did you say?" Richard choked out. His voice had lost its strength and turned into a broken, suffocated cry from a man whose crown and power had just been taken from him. That woman, that black woman dressed so simply, the one who came by subway and carried that plain leather bag, she is Vivian Moore, the private billionaire behind the entire Moore Capital investment system on Wall Street? No, that's impossible. There has been a mistake. Security and reception said she was a support service contractor. Richard spun around, his bloodshot eyes filled with panic and madness as they turned toward the corner of the table where CFO Douglas Crane sat motionless. Richard slammed both hands on the table and shouted in absolute desperation. "Douglas, why didn't you tell me? You're the chief financial officer. You're the one who directly communicated with them. Why didn't you stop me?" Douglas Crane slowly lifted his head. The CFO's face no longer held fear or pleading. In its place was total helplessness, a surrender before the cruel fate his leader had brought upon them with his own hands. Douglas looked straight into Richard's eyes. The corner of his mouth twitched into a bitter smile, and his voice came out broken, filled with long-buried anger. "I tried to stop you, Richard," I shouted. "I begged you to stop from the very second you refused to shake her hand. I told you to sit down and listen. I told you to look at the documents she brought. But your cruel arrogance and your prejudice blinded you. You saw only a cheap suit. You saw only a skin color. You saw only a handbag with no brand logo, and from that you decided you had the right to trample on another person's dignity. Do you know what that black leather folder she brought this morning was? It was the privileged capital disbursement order that only the fund's owning chairwoman could personally bring for live signature at the partner office. She was the one holding the life of this company, the last breath of this company. And you, Richard, your own stupid arrogance strangled it with your own hands." Douglas Crane's shout rang through the conference room, struck the tempered glass walls, and came back, stripping the CEO's humiliation bare. Richard Whitmore stood frozen, his ears rang. The pounding of blood rushing to his head made him dizzy. He looked down at the document on the table, then back at Vivian's photograph on Bloomberg. Everything was already too late. The rules of Wall Street were simple. When strategic trust was broken by personal insult, no number could save the situation. Nathan Graves lightly adjusted the crease on the sleeve of his Savile Row suit. His eyes passed over Richard's pathetic state with absolute indifference. For those who worked under Vivian Moore, they had seen many arrogant people pay dearly for their prejudice. But none had ever dug their own grave as quickly and completely as the CEO of Whitmore and Hale had that morning. "The notice has been delivered," Nathan Graves said, his voice flat like the final ruling of a financial court. "Have a good day, gentlemen." The chief legal counsel turned and prepared to leave the conference room with his assistants. But just as his foot reached the mahogany threshold, Nathan suddenly paused. He did not fully turn around, only tilted his head slightly to one side, revealing the sharp angle of his face under the ceiling lights. The corner of his mouth lifted faintly as he delivered one final blow, a cruel hook that destroyed the last fragile hope left inside the room. "Oh, and for your board's accurate information in the next internal meeting, The $360 million strategic capital line has already been approved by Chairwoman Vivian Moore for immediate redirection into Apex Holdings Partnership Investment Fund, your direct competitor, which is seeking to acquire all your frozen projects in the market. I believe Apex's public hostile takeover offer for Whitmore and Hale stock will reach your office before 5 o'clock this afternoon. Prepare yourself for the possibility that this tower may be renamed Mr. Whitmore. With that, Nathan Graves walked out decisively. The double mahogany doors slammed shut with a dry, final thud. Inside the conference room, the tablet on the table gave another long alert tone, showing that Whitmore and Hale's stock price had triggered an automatic sell-off order and fallen another 6%. Richard Whitmore staggered, both arms hanging limp at his sides. A body slid along the edge of the quartz table before he collapsed into the leather chair at the head of the table. His empty eyes stared upward at the 30-foot ceiling, where the huge crystal chandeliers still shone with beautiful, heartless light. The most devastating financial storm in the company's history had officially struck the tower, and it had begun with one small tissue wiping clean a handshake that had been refused. The electronic board of the New York Stock Exchange at 2:30 in the afternoon had no mercy. The ticker symbol WMH of Whitmore and Hale flashed in a red as bright as blood. The falling numbers kept jumping under the pressure of thousands of automatic sell orders triggered by trading algorithms. The 4% drop from the morning was quickly crushed and replaced by a record 18% collapse attempt after Moore Capital Group's spokesperson confirmed to Bloomberg that the fund had officially withdrawn its $360 million investment proposal. An 18% loss in market capitalization in less than 4 hours meant that more than $2 billion in assets belonging to investors and founding families had vanished into the empty space of the market. On the 38th floor of the tower, the atmosphere inside the emergency board meeting room held no shouting. There was only the rustling of legal files and the anxious tapping of lawyers representing shareholders. 11 of the company's highest voting board members sat around a dark oak round table, every face marked with deep lines of tension and anger. The chair at the head of the table was empty. Richard Whitmore was not in the room, was not allowed to be there. Under the corporation's supplementary bylaws, when a crisis threatened serious damage to core shareholder interests because of the personal conduct of the CEO, the board had the right to call a special meeting to temporarily strip the executive of control. Douglas Crane stood at the presentation podium. A shirt was wrinkled. His tie hung loose to one side. He had just finished showing the security footage extracted from the 42nd floor conference room at 10 o'clock that morning. On the large screen, the image of Richard Whitmore pointing his finger straight at Vivian Moore and insulting her skin color, her clothing, and ordering security to remove her appeared clearly impossible to deny. The audio captured by the conference room directional microphone played every cold, cruel word from the former CEO. Mrs. Moore, if you want to ask for a job for your son in the logistics department, I'll go down to the basement and speak with HR. This is no longer an ordinary liquidity crisis, members of the board, Douglas Crane said. His voice was hoarse after a long day facing financial regulators. This footage has already been obtained by an independent source. If it is released on media platforms or social networks, especially in the current sensitive climate around workplace discrimination in America, the Whitmore and Hale brand will be erased completely from the investment portfolios of every public pension fund and financial institution across the country. We did not only lose Moore Capital's $360 million. We are now facing a series of class action lawsuits from our own employees and civil rights organizations. A white-haired man seated on the left side of the round table, Arthur Pendleton, who represented a founding family holding 12% of the company's shares, slammed a folder onto the table. His face shook with anger. 18% of market value gone because of the stupid ego of a man who thought he was king of this tower? Richard crossed the line a long time ago. His arrogance turned this workplace into a prison of fear. We cannot allow a man like that to keep dragging the entire corporation into the grave. The vote took place immediately afterward. There was no need for long discussion. 11 arms rose at once in cold, decisive unity. The resolution passed with an absolute 100% vote. Richard Whitmore was removed as chairman and chief executive officer of Whitmore and Hale, effective immediately at 3 o'clock that afternoon. An investigative journalist from the Charlotte Observer received an anonymous file full of emails, recordings, and evidence showing that Richard Whitmore had suppressed denied promotions to, and unfairly fired dozens of highly capable employees from underrepresented groups simply because they did not come from elite universities or did not have the skin color that matched his prejudice. Sarah Jenkins, a former risk analysis director who had been forced out by Richard 3 years earlier after speaking against one of his reckless investment decisions, chose to appear publicly on a live CNBC broadcast at 4 o'clock that afternoon. During all my years working there, we were taught to stay silent before Richard's pressure. Sarah said into the camera, her eyes steady but still carrying the pain of someone whose career had been deeply wounded. If you didn't wear a designer suit, if you came to work on public transportation, he treated you like an invisible tool. What happened to Mrs. Vivian Moore this morning was not a rare accident. It was the true nature of the toxic corporate culture Richard built. I am grateful that someone finally had enough power to expose that truth to the light. While the media and financial storm swept violently through Whitmore Tower, the Moore Capital Tower 7 blocks away was filled with a completely opposite stillness and warmth. Vivian Moore's office was on the top floor of the building, designed in a minimalist style with pale oak walls and natural green plants placed in the corners. The soft late-afternoon sunlight of Charlotte passed through the large windows and laid a honey-gold color across the calm solid wood desk, where there were few papers, only a laptop and a small plain leather notebook. Vivian Moore sat in a gray fabric chair, both hands wrapped around a white ceramic cup filled with warm chamomile tea. She was no longer wearing the navy suit from that morning. Instead, she wore a simple cream turtleneck sweater, comfortable and quiet. Her deep black eyes looked through the window toward the skyline, where the skyscrapers of the financial district were beginning to turn on their lights. Her face showed no gloating from someone who had just executed a stunning reversal. There was no excitement from a person who had just wiped $2 billion from an opponent. Her face remained calm and relaxed, like someone who had simply finished clearing a garden after a tiring day of work. 3 firm but gentle knocks sounded at the door. Nathan Graves entered, holding a tablet and the day's trading summary file. The chief legal counsel still carried his polished elegance, but when he stepped into this room, he automatically lowered his voice to protect the quiet of the chairwoman's private space. Mrs. Moore, the emergency board meeting at Whitmore and Hale has concluded, Nathan reported, standing about 2 meters from Vivian's desk with respect. Richard Whitmore has officially been removed without a golden parachute. Their stock closed down 18.5%. The transfer of the $360 million capital line to Apex Holdings is complete, and Apex sent the hostile public takeover offer to Doug Crisco's office 10 minutes ago. Vivian nodded lightly and took a small sip of tea. The warmth of chamomile softened the cold edge of the afternoon. How is Douglas Crane? He is trying to stabilize employee morale and is cooperating fully with the independent audit team, Nathan replied. He swiped to another page on the tablet, then continued with a slight hesitation in his voice. There is one more thing, Mom. Since 3 o'clock this afternoon, my personal phone and the assistant office hotline have received a total of 52 calls from Richard Whitmore's private number. He has been begging repeatedly to meet with you, even for 5 minutes in a coffee shop downstairs, to issue a formal apology and ask you to reverse the decision to redirect capital to Apex Holdings. He says he is willing to kneel if that can save family company. Vivian Moore's expression did not change when she heard the number 52. She did not reach for the silent phone on the desk. She showed no trace of pity or hesitation. To her, Richard's late pleas did not come from true moral regret. They were only the panic of a man who had just lost the food source of power and was now trying to claw his way back to his old position. She set the teacup down on the ceramic saucer. Vivian lifted both hands and looked at her right palm, the same hand she had wiped clean with a tissue that morning after being humiliated by a refused handshake. The lines across her palm were deep. The small calluses on her fingertips were the marks of 30 years of relentless work, from the days when she was a poor girl in the Brownsville projects to the day she became the head of Moore Capital Group. Slowly, she turned her head toward Nathan, then looked out across the vast space beyond the skyscraper window. Her voice was low, gentle, and steady, but it carried a deep philosophical weight, like a quiet reflection spoken both to herself and to the dangerous financial world outside. You know, Nathan, prejudice is like a thick glass cage growing inside the human mind. When a person stands inside that glass cage, they look out and always carry the illusion that they are standing above everyone else, judging and deciding the value of the whole world beneath them. But in truth, they do not realize that the glass cage is isolating them. It traps them inside their own ignorance and narrowness. Richard Whitmore did not see me this morning. He only saw the cage of his own prejudice reflected through my suit and the way I traveled. Vivian gave a small smile, the forgiving smile of someone who had passed through many storms in life and understood the nature of cause and consequence. She continued, her voice flowing smoothly like cool water. Many people out there, and perhaps Richard himself right now, think I withdrew that $360 million capital line as personal revenge to satisfy the anger of a woman who had been insulted. But they are wrong. In the highest world of finance, money has no emotions, and the person directing money must never allow emotion to control a decision. I withdrew the capital for one core rational reason. A company whose leader does not know how to respect the basic dignity of human beings, a culture that looks down on the people working around it, will never know how to respect investor capital or grow it sustainably. Arrogance always walks side by side with blind spots in risk management. And today, Richard's blind spot proved itself. Vivian stood and walked closer to the large glass wall of the office. Charlotte's red sunset was coming down, laying color across the city rooftops. She folded her arms in front of her chest. Her back was straight, showing a dignity that could not be shaken by any power. A person's dignity, Nathan, has never lived in the designer clothes they wear, the car they drive, or the floor where their office sits. It lives in the values, the moral bricks, and the ability they quietly build when no one is watching. When there is no camera recording and no applause praising them. Richard thought he could take away my dignity with an order to remove me from a room. But he did not understand that the only thing he managed to strip away was his own false mask of power. Nathan Graves stood still, looking at the back of the great black woman before him, and absolute respect rose inside him. He understood that the deal today was not only an expensive lesson for Richard Whitmore or Whitmore and Hale. It was a cold declaration sent to the entire Wall Street elite. The age of authoritarian arrogance built on class privilege was ending. True value and sustainable growth in the future had to be built on a foundation of respect for human beings. I understand, Mrs. Moore, Nathan said softly. He bowed his head and gathered the tablet. I will inform security to block all calls from Richard's number and reject every request from him to enter the building. Our schedule tomorrow begins at 8 in the morning with the new executive team at Apex Holdings. Thank you, Nathan. You may rest now, Vivian said without turning around. Nathan's footsteps faded, then the door closed gently, returning the office to its quiet peace. Vivian Moore stood for 5 more minutes before the glass wall, watching Charlotte fully light up, sparkling like a magnificent galaxy on the ground. Then she walked back to her desk and picked up the plain unbranded leather handbag with worn corners. The same bag that had walked with her through so many rises and falls, and the same bag Richard had mocked that morning. She dimmed the ceiling lights, leaving only a small desk lamp glowing with warm yellow light, then slowly walked out of the office. 15 minutes later, in the marble lobby of Moore Capital Tower, the glass revolving doors kept moving as office workers stepped out after a long workday. Vivian Moore came through the revolving door and blended into the crowded stream of people hurrying along the sidewalk of Tryon Street. The evening air of Charlotte carried a slight seasonal chill. Car horns sounded in steady bursts. The voices and laughter of young people heading toward fast food restaurants or the subway station created a lively and ordinary city rhythm. In the middle of that crowd, Vivian Moore gently pulled the collar of her sweater higher to keep warm, tucked her plain leather bag against her side, and walked calmly toward the familiar subway station. None of the people passing by recognized the simply dressed middle-aged black woman walking beside them. None of them knew that the calm-eyed woman had just made a financial decision that shook the New York Stock Exchange and reshaped the structure of one of the oldest corporations in the city in a single morning. She disappeared completely into the crowd, with no bodyguards, no luxury car, no expensive display. But inside that slender body lived supreme inner strength, radiant dignity, and absolute freedom, the kind of real power that did not need any glass cage to prove itself.